I think you can hear me. I think people can hear me. Hey, it's me. Oh my goodness. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Roguelike Celebration. You can hear me? Awesome. Yeah. All right. You made it. Welcome. This is the sixth Roguelike Celebration in a row. And we are so excited to have everyone here today. The energy is it's very exciting. Thank you so much for coming to another digital roguelike celebration. This is a continuing experiment we started last year, and we really wanted to try and make it a special space that carried some of the fun and discovery and socializing of what we loved about roguelike celebration all those years. And so we've built this, a lot of it being one of the amazing volunteers that run this conference. And so it was a bit of a leap of faith to try and make this space. And, it's still very unique. It's got its own ups and downs because it is made, by ourselves and our group. So thank you for your patience and all your feedback. The love for it last year is what let us keep building it out this year. We were trying new things like video chat. If things are a little wonky, refresh the page, have patience for us. And there's a note wall in the central hall. You can leave feedback and suggestions, which we super appreciate. So enjoy it. This is entirely volunteer run organization. We're just happy to do this. We've got new volunteers and old volunteers, and we do this out of joy for the community and for this event that we love so much. Have a lot of fun. If you haven't picked up on it, this isn't your traditional conference. This isn't a very professional game development event. This is a celebration of everyone who loves roguelikes and procedural generation and just being creative and sharing that love for all these kind of games and game design ideas. We're going to have a lot of fun. We have a lot of different speakers, and try and think of this as like a real space. Everyone in here is a real person. Be polite, be friendly, be nice. We're all here to have a good time. We do have a code of conduct. You can see there's a link to it on the left-hand side of the space, or you can find it on our website. Make sure to give that a read. We also have moderators in space all the time. When it's open, you can type /mod to reach the moderators if you have any kind of issue. Or again, look at our website and you can find more ways to reach out to the mod team. We're happy to help. Don't hesitate if anything feels a little off and you're not sure. Please reach out to us. Please behave, follow our code of conduct. If you don't, we can and will ban you, but we don't want to. But so give that a try. And we want everyone to feel welcome here. And if you are potentially listening to this already on YouTube or Twitch or anything like that, and you wonder kind of what I'm mentioning about left-hand side of the screen or special social space, we are in a mud-like digital conference zone. You can still get in. Go to roguelike.club and you can get a ticket from Eventbrite. Variable prices available, and that will get you into our social space. So you're free to watch on other streaming platforms. You'll just find that the only place where we've enabled chat where we can actually moderate it is here in the social space. So you can join that at any time. And you can also see on the left-hand side of your screen, whichever side that is, that we have our schedule. We got all kinds of talks. We've got social time to explore the space. We got unconference time, which we'll talk about when we get into the first one, but it's kind of like more structured discussions. And one thing we really want to emphasize is that we're not the boss of you. Wander around, go where you'd like. You can be in the theater when we have talks going on. That's the main place, but you can also pop out the theater video and you can go to other rooms. You can explore, This is the equivalent of you can wander off into the kitchen while someone's talking. It's not rude. And again, like even if there's video chat going on, maybe it feels like you're obligated to stay in a conversation. You can just walk out, go where you want to go, do what you want to do, and feel free to explore. So, oh my God, I have all of these things to get through. Bear with me. Now, t-shirts. You see this here? You see this beautiful shirt? This beautiful shirt was designed by Marlo Daub, who worked on Dicey Dungeons. We're extremely happy. It's a beautiful shirt, and you can still order it go to our website, roguelike.club, or I think if you go to the swag table, you can even maybe find a link to it there. Check it out. We've also got mouse pads for the first time, designed by Sam, so that's cool and old school. That's radical. We also have a Steam sale, thanks to Andrea's hard work from the Round Guard team. So if you check that out on Steam, we've got all kinds of games from our current speakers, our past speakers, and friends of the show on varying levels of discount, and just really, really cool stuff. Give them some love. It felt great for us to kind of give back to all of our speakers and point people at those amazing games. So check that out. You can watch the stream. If you want to tweet, our hashtag is roguelike celebration, not rogue cell, roguelike celebration. Twitter has longer character limits now. We don't have to shorten it. You can say the whole thing. And our wonderful volunteer, Christy, will be doing some live tweeting of the events as we go, which is great. I want to say thank you to Maggie from White Coat Captioning, who is live captioning the words I'm saying, which is wonderful, and will be doing so throughout the event. Steam sale, basically you just go to the Steam page. You can actually get to it from here. There's a room in the social space called the Office of Steam, and that has a link out to it. And basically you'll find there's an event page that has all the games on it, and they'll have their own sales set up. Thanks also to Kristen, who did our overlays, which you saw earlier when we had the kind of, stream starting soon. So thank you for that. Once we have the speakers start, if you are in the theater, there should be a button that says write a question. And that's how we're going to do speaker Q&A. You can write your questions in that note wall. You can do an upvote on questions that you really want to hear answered. And myself or whoever else is emceeing through the day will be using those to bring those questions to the speaker. So use the note wall if you have questions. It'll be up to the speakers if they leave time or not for too many questions, but if they do, that's where to ask them. We also have something new, which you can see also in this space or on the map, that we have breakout rooms: warrior, mage, rogue, and tourist. Those will be assigned in the schedule to each speaker in a kind of block of talks. And that's the opportunity for, after the talks are done, if you have more questions that you didn't have time to get into, if you just want to enthuse about how much you love the talk, go to the assigned room. If the speaker has time, they'll be hanging out there and a chance to have a conversation. If they don't, well, there might be other people who like that talk too. Go check it out. And again, if you don't want to be there anymore, just walk out. Just leave. You can do it anytime. It's not rude, we promise. So you can keep that. You can multi-class breakout room if you just click the links really fast. May or may not recommend, but you can. So that's all the ways you can talk to our speakers, and they'll be kind of throughout the space. We also have these types of note walls in various places where you can leave kind of, it's kind of like a digital yearbook, but roguelike themed in many different places. Particularly of note in the Space Hangar Lounge, we have a note wall to share links to interesting topics. So that's where speakers might put links to their slides or to kind of extra follow-ups. And if you are, enjoying a talk or have a cool conversation and you're like, man, no one's heard of this roguelike I love so much, people got to know. Go to the Space Hangar, put the link in the note wall, let people know. Last year we had all kinds of people sharing great links and comments and advice on other things to check out in the chat. So we wanted to have a dedicated place to contain that. So Space Hangar Lounge is where that lives. Gosh. I think that's actually all of my administrative stuff. It was a lot, but yeah, hit the bricks whenever you want to. I will periodically remind you to hit the bricks if you'd like, because you're free to do that. Yeah, and we've got a great list of speakers. We're going to be starting off that in 6 minutes. So I've got 6 minutes to just kind of kill time and kick off. How y'all doing today? This is the classic back and forth. Who are you most excited about? The red shirt does look great. And it comes in other colors. It's not even only red. Get all the shirts in every color. Just do it. Also, there are lots of things to explore in the space. You won't miss the reminder to hit the bricks. We will shout it periodically and you'll hear it everywhere. What socks did I pick? I'm currently wearing the black and white ASCII roguelike socks. I don't remember what year this is from. Maybe 2018. We have great shirts and great socks every year. We don't have physical socks this year, but we have a mouse pad. And isn't that better? I'm glad you're excited for Addie's tabletop talk. I think it's going to be great. And I'm pretty sure Addie specifically will be using a breakout room to do a demo of his work afterwards, which is very exciting. Yes, all kinds of things. All kinds of things. They are rainbow glasses. Thank you. A sock for a mouse. We'll add that. And yeah, we're going to be kicking off with Michael Brogue in just a few minutes here. Though, I mean, I guess if you want to start early, Michael, you could do that. But it is up to you. We won't put you on the spot. And yeah, it's exciting. I'm reading in so many different places at once because there's so much going on. Invisible socks? Yes. Yeah, admin self-care tips. You got to make sure to take care of yourselves. Oops. Well, yeah, I'm doing all kinds of things. Private chat. Cool. There's a lot going on. 4, are we good? There's a lot of people here. It's so exciting. It's the hype. And yeah, I'm glad people appreciate the subtitles. Those are really useful. Yeah, and in the space, if you look around, there's a lot of different stuff. If you ever notice things where it's like, hey, how come that person's got a blue username? How come that person has a pudding? Look around. You'll be able to find it. Just look around you. I guess maybe I've got Danny in my back end support right now. Thank you, Danny. Do you want to figure out if we want to put Michael on early while I just talk about things? This is a real volunteer conference, and you can tell because we just we're very open about, what we're organizing, what we're doing. We do have a public YouTube stream. You can share it. People are free to watch. That's the whole thing. The chat is only enabled here, but you can read and watch anywhere you want. And yeah, you got to solve the mystery of our roguelike space in 48 hours. That's how long you get. You got IRC vibes. In terms of what people have been playing, I mean, I've been playing a lot of Slay the Spire still. It's been a long time, but I'm at 200 hours and I'm not stopping. And I see that our moderation team's doing a great job. Yeah. And I think we're ready. All right, everybody. Let's bring up our first guest of the day. Hello. It's Brogue.
Hello.
Hello. I mean, I think that you're someone who a lot of people will be familiar with, but if you don't know, Michael Brogue, described as strange wild creature, eclectic game developer, and actual wizard, which I gotta say, I think you're embodying right now. So yeah, kicking it off with a real wizard. So I think that then I will hand it off to you to talk about the possibility of rogue elements.
Yeah. My slides go, and how do we do this? I've lost it. Here we go. Share, tab, this one. Here we go. Is this working? Is this sharing? Everything okay? I'm not hearing anything in response.
We're good. We're good. I'll come on and tell you you're good.
You're telling me we're good.
Got the slides up. We're good.
Okay.
Take it away.
So I'm going to talk about some aspects of the game Rogue, a very old game that we all have some familiarity with. And then I'll talk interleave with that a little bit about how I've adapted some ideas that are in Rogue into my own games. And yeah, that's my basic idea. So the core mechanic of Rogue is that you press direction keys, explore a dungeon, and fight monsters. And what I think is a quite clever idea that I'm looking at it from the modern perspective. Like this maybe seems quite obvious because we've played 100 games that use this idea, but coming at it from the other side, I like back before I was born, I wonder like how big an idea was it to have the same input keys both move and attack, because they're very different actions. And when you're thinking about how am I going to make this new thing a video game and incorporate a kind of fantasy adventure, I'm not sure if this level of abstraction is so obvious. Okay, so yeah, what happens? You press a key, and if there's nothing there, then you move. If there's something there, you hit it. And yeah, I just think this is just a really nice, simple basis to build a game on. I'm really emphasizing how simple it is, because roguelikes don't always have a reputation for being elegant and simple, and I think that's wrong. Like this is a really cute idea, and yeah, there's something that happens later in the game that's quite cool. You run into an enemy that you can't see, and it appears to you as though it's just an empty space, and so when you attempt to press a direction key towards that space, instead of moving into that space, you attack. And I've written here also the potion of blindness makes all enemies invisible here. And so previously the controls were unambiguous. There's an exclusion between spaces with enemies in them and spaces without. But this breaks that, and it becomes unclear what the outcome of a given direction key will be. And this is really weird. If I told you in advance, here's a video game in which you choose what direction to perform actions in, but you don't get to choose what actions they are, the game decides for you, you'd feel like that was like almost unplayable. But how it actually is in the context of the game after you've already accepted the idea that moving and attacking are kind of equivalent because they're on the same keys, it just feels completely natural. I just like to try and see this from the outside as though it was a weird thing, even though when you play it, it feels natural. More Travis, you should play it. It's fucking great. This is my first time giving a video talk, and I'm just trying to get my head around. I'm sure several other people have this experience before too. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I think that's a really nice twist that it has, and yeah, but basically the idea of moving and attacking with the same keys is quite cute, enables a bunch of possibilities. And as a game designer, when I run into a cool idea, I try to think, what more can I do with this? And so here's a couple of variations on the idea. My game 868 Hack. So Rogue has a ranged attack. You can throw items at an enemy, but you do that by pressing T to throw, selecting the direction, selecting the item. And that's instead of moving or attacking for your turn. In my game 868 Hack, the attack unified with the movement controls is a ranged attack. So if you attempt to make a ranged attack in a direction that there's an enemy, if you attempt to, if you swipe a direction key, if you press a direction key in a direction that there's an enemy, which you would naturally feel as moving in that direction, instead you make a ranged attack. You stay in one spot, just as in Rogue, you stay in one spot when making a melee attack. And so this doesn't make physical sense. Like, there's a space there and you can't move into it because attempting to move into it instead attacks. But the game is set in a glitchy cyberspace world, so it's actually in keeping with the theming of the game that it doesn't make physical sense. So I'm quite proud of that. I feel like it's a nice twist on the original Rogue idea. And another game that has a variation on this is Nightmare Cooperative by Lucky Frame, in which one player controls a party of multiple characters with one set of direction keys. When you press left, all your characters on the screen do left. In the Rogue sense, either they move left if there's an empty space, or they attack left if there's an enemy. And again, this works because movement and combat are on the same set of controls. If you had to press attack and choose a direction, often that would happen is 3 of your party would be attacking empty space just for one to attack. But instead, you can have them synergistically doing different moves, different actions with the same inputs. One of them can be attacking an enemy while the other one's moving towards the exit, and the other one is picking up a treasure there. So that's quite cute. I like that game. My game, Imbroglio, has a little bit of that as well. There's one item that can control enemies, but I've used as the example here their game because it's the whole game, and that's quite cool. And I'm pretty sure Baba Is You does things like this too. It's really quite cool. So I'm sure there's other variations we could invent on this concept, and that would be fun. And also there's obviously a lot we can do in roguelikes with just taking Rogue's movement and layering other things on top. And roguelikes, they're great. Okay, what else does Rogue have? Rogue has items. It's compared to NetHack, ADOM, Angband, the later big roguelikes, it's a fairly small game. It's fairly simple. It just has moving, attacking, and using items. So your character progression is leveling up and getting more items. And some items you equip for stat bonuses. Some items are activated to change the combat situation. Basically, because combat is just move into an enemy space to attack it, there's not a lot of I want to say there's not a lot of subtlety. That's not quite right. There's not a lot of different. The outcome is mostly determined by the rolls. That's what I want to say. You hit, they hit, you hit, they hit. If the rolls go well or your stats are stronger, you're going to win. If their stats are stronger, then they might kill you, and you need an out to do something different. You can run away. That sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And usable items gives you an alternative. And that's pretty important to all roguelikes, I think, to have a limited resource that you can use to make a variation to a combat situation. If you could do it all the time, some you can. There's so many possibilities. Okay, Rogue. Stick with Rogue. So I'm going to talk about a few very specific items in Rogue, and I'm not really going to talk about the specific items. What I'm trying to get at, the heart of it, is like sort of game design concepts, but I'm going to use as examples like very specific items. So the wand of cold is a wand. So wands in Rogue, you activate them by pressing Z to zap them, choose a direction with a direction key, which how you're going to aim it, and choose the item. So it's very simple aim, point and fire, and it deals damage to enemies for 6 spaces in a row, unless they're a Yeti. And like I really like this. It's flavorful. It makes sense. The Yeti presumably originates from the Alps. It's adapted to a cold environment, so the wand of cold doesn't hurt it. And like a lot of modern games use the style of having like a elemental damage system where you might have the one does a frost attack, and the Yeti has 80% frost resistance, and you have boots of 2% frost resistance, and like that's absolutely a type of system that you can get a lot of gameplay out of. But I think it's really special how Rogue does it. It just has one special case exception. This wand doesn't hurt this Yeti, and the whole narrative of, oh, it's because it's a cold attack, it's because like that all happens in your head. Like this is Rogue's like unique design style, to just have individual exceptions like this. And to me, this feels like this gives it a character of magic. When you build a magic system for a game that is really logical and coherent and like systematic, it often isn't magic anymore. It's just a system. It just feels like a science. And Rogue like avoids that. It just has a lot of one-off exceptions like this. And I think part of why a lot of games use this the like generalized magic system style is because that's what we're taught as a good style of software engineering, to construct good extensible systems, not one-off exceptions. And that absolutely is a good software engineering advice, but our game designs don't have to directly reflect how we program them. So like our designs don't have to be limited by our software engineering style. So yeah, magic is in the exceptions. And usually the sweet spot is that you need to have a few things that follow a rule to establish a rule, and just one thing that's an exception to the rule. Once you have more than one exception, your mind automatically establishes a more general rule. And yeah, when there's just one exception, often we can stop that rule establishing part of the brain from working and just go, oh yeah, it just is special. Yeah, that's how I think about it. Like, yeah. Okay. So having these items that target a specific enemy type works well with Rogue, because Rogue has relatively few enemy types. There's one for each letter of the alphabet, I believe. And in a larger game where there's say, several hundred enemy types, a wand that just doesn't affect this enemy type would it just wouldn't come up most of the time. You wouldn't even notice it. It would be a rule that doesn't make sense to have in there. So for larger games, a more systematic structure is often really the right choice. My own games, I've mostly gone in the other direction, and I have very few enemy types. I like really small numbers and like dense interactions. And so I've been able to have these types of effects be a larger part of the game. So, for example, 868 Hack has just 4 enemy types, and there's an ability that damages all enemies of the virus type on the screen. On average, that's a quarter of all enemies, but situationally it can be even more. So that's something that's a similar character to this one doesn't affect this type, but a more integral part of the game. And similarly, Syncopath has a bunch of wands that just kill an enemy of this type. And in Rogue, like maybe a dragon killing wand would be great, a Jabberwock killing wand, but like it would be pretty niche. So I think that's all I have to say about this one. Okay, move on. Quaffle potion. Okay, the next item I want to talk about is the scroll of teleport. And what this does, you read it, R to read, L to choose the scroll, and it instantly moves your hero to a random space anywhere on the current level that's not currently occupied by another creature. And then that's the end of your turn, the enemies move. This is presumably inspired by the teleport spell in Dungeons & Dragons, but Dungeons & Dragons teleport is about travel. You set a destination, and maybe there's some dice rolls on the way to where you get there, but it's about going somewhere. And for Rogue to have a teleport like that, you would need an extra input prompt. Okay, you're teleporting, select a space on the level where you want to go to. And the designers chose to keep the items relatively simple. Later roguelikes sometimes have prompts like this, but in Rogue, all items, so wands, you pick a direction and they do their thing. Scrolls and potions, you just select to use the item and it does its thing. So it's, again, like, it's interface simplicity. They've chosen the effects of the items to not require any further input. And this is essentially the same ability as the hyperspace button in Space War, which you press it. So Space War, if you don't know, is arguably the very first video game. So you press the hyperspace button to pop out of the screen and pop in somewhere else randomly. So random teleport feels like a very quintessentially video gamey effect. And I really like it because it's not intrinsically a beneficial or harmful effect. Rogue has unidentified items, and they're risky to try out and figure out what they are, because mixed in with them, some of them are bad. There's a scroll of fire, which just blows up in your face and hurts you. But the scroll of teleport isn't isn't intrinsically good or bad because it just moves you to a different situation. Some positions are good to be in, some positions are bad to be in. Randomizing your position, who knows? But in practice, it's usually a good item because you once you've identified it, you make a decision about how to use it. And with a lot of random effects, there's a sense of regression to the mean. If a situation is worse than average, randomizing it will put it more likely somewhere in the middle, so probably better than it was. If your situation is better than average, randomizing it will put it on average somewhere in the middle. So you probably don't want to do that. So that suggests a strategy for using Scroll of Teleport. If you're in a really bad situation, you use it to get out. Otherwise, except that Rogue has fairly large maps. It's the 80 by 20 grid, and okay, not all of those are spaces. There's rooms within that, but it adds up to hundreds of possible tiles, and there's only usually a few enemies on the level at once. So most of the time, teleporting is actually a pretty safe choice. Some exceptions. Sometimes there's a room full of monsters. Is Vim a roguelike? Maybe. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. So if you had a game that was more okay, the limited number of enemies might be a technological limitation of the time. I'm not sure completely, but yeah, if you had a roguelike that had like a war happening and the whole level is filled up with hundreds of enemies, then teleporting randomly in that is more likely to be bad than in a sparse dungeon with just a few scattered enemies. And in my own games, I tend to use quite small grids, 6x6, 8x8, even Imbroglio's 4x4. And so similarly to the large grid with a whole army, a small grid with a handful of enemies is denser. There are fewer safe spaces. Teleporting randomly is more likely to be bad. So I like to do some different things to mitigate the randomness, to have a teleport effect not be as risky as it would be to just randomly teleport in this small, dense grid. One option is to just remove the randomization, give you control of your teleport. So NetHack has a ring of teleport control, which does this, more or less. If you choose a space that happens to be in a wall, then it randomly teleports you instead. So you can teleport to a known space, or you can teleport into the unknown with a chance of it being randomized. My game Imbroglio has a blink dagger, which at first randomly teleports you, but as it levels up, it randomly selects 2 possible target spaces, and you click the one that you want to move to. So it's not the full ring of teleport control. It's just partially random but partially controlled. And then, yeah, it's currently only on iOS. I'm meaning to release it on PC at some point, but life. And then as it levels up, it chooses 3 spaces and then it chooses 4 spaces. So you get more and more control, but never full control. It can still be a risky action. And yeah, this is essentially the same thing as in a card game. You can have an effect draw a card, or you can have effect draw 2 cards and discard one of them, right? In a dice game, you can have the effect roll 2 dice and pick the highest. Any random effect can be made a little bit more controlled by having this idea of do it multiple times and pick one. Another possibility is just to reduce the random variance. like rather than teleport anywhere on the level, you could teleport just in this room or just outside of this room or just in a diagonal line. Any limited rule that you like to think of will make it not necessarily better, because you might be ruling out some of the good spaces that you'd want to possibly want to teleport to, but makes it more predictable, and so it's more likely to be better when you choose to use it. It gives you more information to make it a wise choice. Another possibility I quite like is to, with this and with any random effect, is to give you a chance to respond to the random outcome before anything bad happens. So in the case of teleporting, teleport, but give you another turn after teleporting. So if you teleport into a room full of monsters, you have a chance to act before they all hit you, rather than what could happen, I believe, in Rogue, is if you teleport into a monster room, you could just die the next turn as they all hit you. And you can also simply improve it by adding, say, a heal or some other resource advantage. So in my game 868 Hack, there's an ability Warp, which is basically just a teleport, basically just a random teleport, except it only picks a space that's occupied by an enemy. So instead of the full level, it's, say, 5 or 6 possible targets. So it's much more predictable. So it's much safer to make a decision about when to use it. It also kills that enemy, which is obviously, like, it makes it a little bit more advantageous. And like all effects in 868 Hack, it's all prog effects, basically the spell effects, it's instantaneous. All but one exception. So it doesn't end your turn, and so you can look at where you've teleported to and decide if you want to do something else there, or maybe teleport again, or yeah, it gives you a chance to respond to it. So it has these 3 ways it's improved above simply a random teleport, and any one of them would make it okay. All 3 of them makes it actually quite a strong spell. And
hey, Michael, I'm just going to give you the heads up. You got 3 minutes, so you can decide if you want to get into this or if you want to answer a couple questions. What are you feeling like?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about this.
All right.
This is like a good item to
Use
talk
your 3
about.
minutes. I will pop in when you're out of time, but use what you got.
Yeah, the last item I want to talk about is the Wand of Polymorph. This is another wand. You point it at an enemy, and it randomly changes its type to another enemy. This is similar to teleport in that it's a random effect that will tend to make a weak enemy stronger. It'll tend to make a strong enemy weaker, but it's not always stronger or weaker. It just changes what abilities the enemy has, what's happening in the game. And I just really love effects like this that just make like twist a situation into a different situation, but not a strictly better or worse situation. Sometimes it makes it a better situation, and that's great. And I had something important to say. Probably not that important. Yes. This interacts with anything that depends on the enemy type. So if you're facing a Yeti and all you have is a Wand of Cold and a Wand of Polymorph, and you're thinking, damn, my Wand of Cold won't do anything about this, you can hit it with the Wand of Polymorph, turn it into something else, hit it with the Wand of Cold, which now damages it. And this is a cool combo. I really like these kind of combos. And in Rogue, it's nice that they come up, but they're kind of rare. So in my games, I've kind of honed in on the elements of Rogue that I think are really like my favorite parts, and I try to make those parts expand out and happen more often and be the whole game. So yeah, I have lots of polymorph effects and lots of effects that care about what type of enemy you have. And yeah, so this kind of situation can be more common. And the last thing is in 868 hack, there's a polymorph ability that is much more powerful than the one of polymorph and rogue, because it hits everything on the screen. But because 868 hack only has 4 different enemy types, like it's not as crazy chaotic as that might seem, because it's fairly predictable. Any one only turns into one of 3 other kinds, and they're all of relatively equal strength. So it's only changing their abilities. It's not changing the strength of the situation. And so because this isn't so wild as it might seem, it's able to be quite cheap in the game.
Hey, Michael. I'm so sorry to have to do this, because this is wonderful. Thank you so much for kicking this off. This has been, between the chat and the Twitter, I could see you're just dropping quotable game design wisdom like mad.
I'd love to catch up on the chat one.
Yes, exactly. And so if you were able to be around after Jeremiah's talk wraps up, we've assigned you the mage breakout room, which feels appropriate, the wizardy one. So if you're around, and if not, people interested can go there to talk further. But thank you so much, Michael, for coming to speak.
Oh, thank you.
A wonderful start. All right. So next up, we are going to have Jeremiah Reed, who's going to be talking Juice Your Turns. Jeremiah, you might know, is a developer of a bunch of small roguelikes like Golden Crown Hotel, Doomazid, and Deadface. And yeah, really excited about this. I think juiciness is something that is often not our first thing we think about with traditional roguelikes. So really excited to have this. All right, welcome aboard.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So
okay.
I will hand it off.
Yeah, so this is a talk about juice. It's not something we typically think about in traditional roguelikes, but I want to convince you that it's a good fit. This presentation is playable at juiceyourturns.com if you want to follow along now or later. And I have to jump back and forth between these tabs to see the questions, but gonna go ahead and go. So
yeah,
you might know me.
Say, don't worry about chat questions. I am on top of it, so don't worry about distracting yourself. We'll have questions at the end. Just
great point. Thank you. Okay. You might know me from some of my 7-day roguelikes. I made 8 of them. I expanded 1 into a larger project, Golden Crown Hotel. We'll talk a little bit about that today. So juice is kind of a nebulous game dev concept, and I think it helps to ground it in something that we all know and love, which is fruit juice, right? And if you think about fruit juice, what do you typically think about? It tastes good, obviously. It feels good. It has a good mouthfeel. Probably the most important part is it's responsive. When you bite into a piece of fruit, it kind of bites back. You get a response, you get interaction. It tells you the thing you're interacting with is alive. It doesn't feel inert or dead. It's very fun, and it is messy. So this is one of the best quotes I found on this topic. Juicy things are things that wobble, squirt, bounce around, and make little cute noises. It's sort of a catch-all phrase for things that make a game more satisfying to interact with. Juice is typically auditory or visual, but it doesn't really need to be. It's about maximum output for minimum input. So 2 important points here. One is that juice is typically graphics, and I'm going to talk about graphical techniques mostly in this talk, but it could also be mechanics. It could be just feedback to the player. It could be text. It could be anything. And the second point is it's really about bang for your buck. It's very much an economical thing. Another good quote, juice amplifies interactivity by providing excessive amounts of feedback in relation to user input. It is superfluous from a strictly mechanical perspective, but turns interacting with the system into a more pleasurable experience. I think that's good. I would push back about superfluous, because sometimes you can even have I would say that you can have mechanics that are juicy, but otherwise this is pretty good. So let's take a look at a real juicy game, right? No, this is not. This is Golden Crown Hotel, the 7-day roguelike version that I made in 1 week in 2014. I think you'd agree it has no animation, no juice, no polish, and that's okay because I made it in a week. But over the last 7 years, I've continued to work on this game, and I think I've learned a few things about juice and animation. I'm going to kind of combine some of those topics together because some of the animation stuff is going to be really low-hanging fruit. So in this, this is by no means the juiciest game or even traditional roguelike you'll ever see, but there's a few techniques you might notice in this GIF. One, like the characters move around smoothly, they hop around, there's bump attack animation, there's a slash animation, there's damage numbers, there's screen shake, the enemies fade out to red. So there's a few things going on. But I have a little bit of regret looking back. It's like, why didn't I add some of these things like early on, like in year 1 or 2? It would have drawn in a bigger audience. I didn't add some of these things until later, and I didn't even find out some of these techniques until like literally working on this talk. And 3 reasons, really. 1, I didn't know some of these things existed. I was kind of surprised to learn about them slowly in reference games. 2, I thought they were going to be a lot harder than they turned out to be. They turned out to be pretty easy to implement. And 3, like I didn't think they were always a good fit for traditional roguelikes because Juice is typically associated with action games. So that's what I want to try to convince you of today. That's why it's called Juice Returns. It's a good fit. It's easy. And I want to show you some of the techniques. So now I do want to look at some really good examples of Juice. The one that inspired me to do this talk actually is Agatha in Absurdia. This was a 7-day roguelike from last year, and I was very impressed by it. You can just take a look, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of bounciness and squishiness, and it's just fun to like play and look at. I also was inspired this year to add some Juice techniques to my 7DRL that I never considered before. But when I saw that this was done in a week, it's like, wow, like if you can do this in a week, like this is really achievable. Now I want to make a distinction, for lack of a better term, between on-grid roguelikes and off-grid roguelikes. So if you go back, like the earliest roguelikes were targeting terminals, right? So the only thing, if you're doing that you choose when you're making graphics is what character to show, what color is the character, and then what is the background color in a small rectangle behind the character. So all you're doing is choosing those 3 things for a rectangular grid of characters. That's it. But the question is, like, can you make a really great looking game or a juicy game within those confines? And I think Brogue is an example that you really can. Like, this is an amazing looking game, even though it's in ASCII. It's on a terminal. The water effects and like gas cloud effects are really cool. Another similar example, this is ripped straight from the trailer, so there's tiles in it, but this is a 1-to-1 mapping with ASCII, I believe. The explosions in Cogmine look great, right? And there's really there's no, compared to some of the examples I'm going to look at later, there's no rotation, there's no scale changes, there's no offsets or anything. It's all just like you show the sprites and that's it. But within that, you can do like a lot of cool stuff. Fidel Dungeon Rescue. This next couple of examples are a little bit less traditional, but I would highly recommend this game. This 3-second GIF is like a masterclass in adding juice to your game. There's like just so much going on. Even if you just study the words level up, there's like 10 different things going on with the animation. And even mechanically, it feels good because when you level up, you get all your health back, you get an extra heart. So just study this and you'll learn like so much. Another slightly less traditional example, Crypt of the Necrodancer. But even though it's kind of a real-time game in a sense if you don't play the Bard, graphically it looks exactly like a top-down turn-based, grid-based traditional roguelike. So any of the lessons you learn from this, you can map it directly onto your game. I learned a lot from Crypt of the Necrodancer. I kind of use it as a reference point because it's got just such great art and there's so many things going on. Not shown here, but like I would consider the Shopkeeper to be a good example of juice. Now some more traditional examples. Dungeon Man's very, very juicy game. And this isn't even like one of the best examples, but there's projectiles, there's blood, there's damage numbers, there's screen shake. Oh, Sproggy Wood, very cutesy, bouncy, juicy game. This one has a interesting rotational screen shake if you look closely that I don't see in a lot of other games. Jupiter Hell got in this recently. Amazing game. Not even shown here. My favorite like juicy mechanic is reloading your gun. To me, if you have like a shotgun or a revolver, you have to put the bullets back in like one by one. And that something about that feels really great. But in this GIF, you see explosions, you see screen shake, you see destructible physics. It all comes together to be very impressive. If you notice, the last 5 examples all use screen shake, which is a core technique. And here's an example that doesn't use screen shake, but has a really cool aesthetic hack. I like how when you attack the monster and kill it, like the bones are flying everywhere. Okay, so we've seen like some really great examples of juice and some really great looking games, great artwork. And so the first thing you may think if you're developing a roguelike, it might be fair to say, or my guess would be most roguelikes are made by single except for like the larger open source ones, are made by single developers, single programmers, and they may not all be artists. And you're thinking, I'm like all that amazing art, I can't do that. but that it's kind of myth. That's not really what Juice is about. You might think back, like even old games, like in simple games. This is Final Fantasy 1. This is a sprite sheet from Final Fantasy 1, and this was made 34 years ago. And it's like, oh, look at all that art I've got to make. This is ridiculous. I can't do that. But if you're a little clever about it, you could do something much simpler. Like you would have one sprite for each character. You could have it side facing like Necrodancer and flip it. Or you could just be more clever and do ASCII, and ASCII can look really great, like we've seen. So this is kind of analogous to the myth of the Juicero, right? The Juicero was initially a $700 consumer device that cold pressed juice, supposedly. And you look at this and you think, wow, I can't really afford the delicious benefits of juice because this is so expensive. This is out of my price range. But of course, that's BS, because as it turned out, like all this thing was doing was emptying these packets, which you could do by hand. So the reality is that juice is cheap. Juice is coded in, not drawn in. It's really, at the end of the day, a programming technique. If you can interpolate between two numbers, you can juice. So these are the kind of things you would interpolate: the scale, position, rotation, and color. So basically, like, juice is all about animation, all about taking one value, one property, and changing the value to something else, for the most part. Little aside here, like I've been a web developer most of my career, and like many years ago, there was a popular library called jQuery, and jQuery could do all these amazing animations with like one function call. It could fade things out, fade things in, bounce things around, change colors. And I always thought that, like, wow, that's a lot of code that has to be backing that, because it's so complex. And while doing this talk, I realized, like, if you're doing it, especially in a dynamic language, that's like 30 lines of code. It's very, very simple. You just take a property on an object, you look at a target you want to go to, and you just slowly get to that target. That's it. That's animation in Juice. So there's lots of different types of animation easings that you can do that will get you between two values. But the two I really like are linear and exponential. So basically, you just have some target you're trying to get to in some starting position. Like, let's say you're trying to move a character from tile A to tile B. That's the delta of the distance between them, and you're trying to get that down to 0. And then over time, you're just getting closer and closer. And if it's linear, you're going at a constant velocity. And if it's exponential, it looks more complicated, but it's actually pretty easy to implement, because all you do is like shave off 10% of the delta every turn, 10%, or whatever value is appropriate. And that turns out to look really pleasing to the eye, because you go really fast towards the target initially, and then you slow down as you get close. So given all that information, there's one caveat or one rule that you absolutely must follow. That is, do not block the player from playing as fast as they want. And when I was initially discussing having this talk, like, I had a lot of people that thought, like, no, this is not a good idea, or like, I don't really like Juice or whatever, because in their mind, and this is associated with Juice, is slow gameplay. And I've heard that Dungeons of Dreadmore is one of the worst offenders, although I did learn that you could speed up the animations quite a bit. It's like you press a button, you wait for the animation, press a button, wait for the animation. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but like, none of them are really strictly necessary. There's no reason at the end of the day that you should stop a traditional roguelike player from mashing the key and flying across the screen. That's one of the coolest things that you can do. And having that flexibility is one of the staples of the genre. So there's no need for that, to block them from doing that. There's one thing you should consider that will help with this when you're trying to do blocking animations. Every animation should be considerate of the time between frames. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is just, if you have a frame rate that's kind of choppy, your animation will be choppy if you have like consistent animations that always animate the same amount. So if you animate a little bit more, if it takes longer, or a little bit less, if it takes less time between frames, that will be more appropriate. So if you skipped a frame, your next animation should basically animate twice as much as it normally would. And the really cool thing, and I don't think I've ever done this until this talk, but it was amazing, is that once you have all your animations using this time system, you can control time and lie about it. And you can use that for debugging, because a lot of times you'll look at these animations and they will look kind of off, but you won't really know why. So you can slow it down and really pinpoint what's going on, or you can use it for dramatic effect, or you can use it to speed up your animations to not block the player. So with that, the power of Juice is yours. The next thing I want to do is show a little demo. Again, this is playable at juicereturns.com. I should say there is going to be sound and music at one point. So hopefully the moderators can make that not super loud. If it's super loud, we'll see when we get there. But anyway, I've got a simple roguelike here, a simple ASCII roguelike, and I want to see if I can juice it up a little bit. So this game has like attack. It has projectiles, even though they're not animated. You don't really see what's going on. Doors. You can walk around. There's field of view. It's simple stuff, right? But like that's enough to make a small little game. So the first thing that we want to do is that we want to these colors. Hopefully you're not agreeing with them. They look kind of awful. So we can just desaturate the colors and choose a better color palette. So basically just take some time to think about your colors. It'll look a lot nicer. So a little comparison 1 and 2. I think that looks better. Very simple thing you can do. It's just very subtle. You can rotate the screen a little bit. It makes it look less static. You can, going back, like this is what this goblin here is going to attack me, and they walk towards me, but they do it in a very jerky way because there's no animation. So if you keep track of all the movements between tiles, you can slowly animate toward each one of those. And you want to keep track of them individually, because if you do it all in one go and there's many movements and you animate all of them together, like a monster going around a corner will go diagonally, which you don't want. But now this monster will just smoothly move towards me. But there's one problem. If I move around, the camera is really jerky. So we can fix that by considering the player's animation as well, adding that to the camera, and now the camera is smooth. But there's one problem I have with that, not a huge problem, but it looks a little stiff. So what we can do is we can slowly follow the camera as the player is moving around. And it's very subtle, but it doesn't feel quite as stiff. Now, some of these techniques are not going to be appropriate for a game. Juice in general, some of the techniques you may think, oh, this is a little too cartoony and too bouncy for my game, if you're making a serious game. And that's okay. Like, take from this what you can. In my game, you literally drink blood off of the floor, so it's a little bit ridiculous and an appropriate fit for Juice. So in this, you when the character moves left or right, they flip left or right. And that might be not a good match for ASCII. That's up to you, but like I think it would be a good match for ASCII. Now, if you want to make it, you want to go a little further, you can animate it. This is just a scale thing, changing the scale from 1 to -1 slowly. At least in the library I use, that's what it was. Kind of has a neat Paper Mario effect, I think. Now, this is really like one of the most important parts of the talk. One of the things I got from Absurdia is that like this is a very simple thing, but if you just add a little bit of bouncing to the game, it makes it feel really great. So the character, this is basically a principle, a classic animation principle. I think it's called the 12 principles of animation from Disney or whatever. The first one is squash and stretch. And basically what that means is it's very exaggerated, but when your character goes to jump, the first thing they do is they crouch down, so they get short. And inversely, they're going to get wide. Then they go to jump, they get tall, they get skinny, and then it keeps going like that, kind of in a loop. And what you can do is you can continue having them bounce even after they like land on the tile. Well, there's no hop, there's no vertical movement now, but even without that, I think this still looks okay. Now we can add a little hop, and it really comes together. And we'll slow that down. I've got some time controls on this, so we'll look at it at like 1/8 speed. So yeah, maybe we'll slow it down even more and do that again. But basically, the character first, you look for them getting short, then tall, then short, then kind of bouncing over and over again. And the Z position is just handled by a parabola. That's very simple. And I think these two techniques together will do a lot for your game. Okay, so this one is also very subtle. When your character moves, there's a slight lean to their movement. Let me slow that down and move once over. But like instead of just being flat, they just lean in the direction that they're moving. You can do it a little bit more dramatic if you want. This one is interesting. Is that if you jump in real life, you don't instantly like go in the direction that you want. First, you have to crouch down. You have to launch yourself through the air. So that's what this kind of represents. It's also a technique of animation called anticipation, I believe. So in this case, the character, before they actually move to the next tile, there's a small delay. And that, once I speed it up, I think you'll kind of notice it gives everything a very like sticky, like bounce, really like bouncy feel, where things like pop between tiles, depending on how high you make the delay. So look at that in real time. It's a little subtle, but it definitely makes a big difference. Now here, yeah, going back to the previous slide. There's a problem with this. This goes back to the blocking animation. If I hit right twice, my character only moves once. And that the reason may be I want to let my animation play out because I made a beautiful animation. Well, I'm telling you not to do that, basically. I don't recommend doing that. Let the player play as fast as they want. So basically, if I hit left twice, I move left twice. It's very simple, right? And now I can just run across the screen. The rotation is a little silly. Wow, it's very silly, but I can run as fast as I want across the screen. The only problem is I have to wait for the animation to catch up because it's still playing at a constant speed. So what I do to solve that is I just double for every outstanding animation, I double the speed, and it gets pretty ridiculously fast. But within like about twice the time it would take to normally move, I can move a dozen tiles across the screen and play as fast as I want. This is just a little fun thing where I go into this room and there's some trees and they bounce around and shake whenever I walk through them. Now, the combat so far has been very static and ugly. So what we're going to do, we're just going to add a little bump attack where the characters appear to move into each other's tile when they attack. And that's pretty effective, I think. Now, here's another, like what I would consider core juice technique, screen shake. You saw it in many of the examples. This is really important. All you're doing is changing the X, Y values randomly. And you might not always notice it if you're playing a game, but it's actually like really makes the attacks feel much better. Now here's another, I'm going to show you a few different types of screen shake. This one, I was inspired by Crypt of the Necrodancer because I was in Golden Crone Hotel. I thought my attacks didn't feel very satisfying. And I don't know if this is actually implemented this way in Crypt of the Necrodancer. It kind of felt like it was. But what I do is instead of randomly moving the camera all around, I just move in one given direction of the enemy. And that kind of feels like you're leaning into the attack and coming back. Look at that again, like this. I think that feels really good, at least in my game. I'm liking it. Here's kind of a funny thing. I don't know if this has ever been implemented anywhere, but like whenever the enemy attacks you, the camera rotates back and forth. It's kind of like you're getting slapped around. So that's kind of fun. And then we'll just add a little, in addition to the XY, we'll actually change the rotation and shake the rotation whenever we get hit. Now, in addition, classic video game trope, when your character gets hit, they flash white. And every game, regardless of what you're doing with Juice, you need to have damage numbers. So I come and attack enemies, and one fun thing is to, if there's a crit, I'd just like to double the size or make it more prominent. Here, I'm using the same animation system I use for the monsters moving around to have a projectile move through the air and get animated between two tiles. And then also, I'm like rotating it so it goes in the direction of the enemy. Now, so I got this from another talk, which I'll link later, but basically one cool juice thing you can do is just have the player's actions have more of an impact on the world or be more visibly present. So, I mean, if the character's running around this dungeon and attacking everything, like, shouldn't there be some evidence of what they're doing? So in this case, I have little corpses. Oddly, I've made it so like you have to attack the corpse to walk through it, and then it's kind of just in the background. Don't know if that makes any sense, but it's kind of fun. Now, why don't we make it a little bit more ridiculous and have enemies fly through the air whenever you attack them? So, try it one more time. Yeah, that's kind of fun, right? All you got to do is have the animation, but add some rotation to that. Now, here's where I'm going to have some sound, and I have no idea how loud it's going to sound. So just let me know if that's ridiculously quiet or loud. And then I have some music coming up also. So I have sounds. Sounds are a great juice thing because, you know, they're not hard to make. There's free sounds everywhere. You can use a program called BFXer to make your own. I added a little drip sound for the movement, which is kind of just funny for a really bouncy game. Oh, how can I forget? You got to have some pew pew sounds if you're going to have a gun. Here's a mechanic, like I mentioned. I just stole this from Jupiter Herald because I think it's the most amazing thing, and it's probably been around for ages. It was probably in Doom RL as well. But you attack a monster, and then you have to individually reload your bullets, and it feels really satisfying. So it's just an example where a mechanic can be juiced too. And then if something important happens, you want a little bit of drama in your game. So my character, if they get killed, like fly through the air, and there's some sad music and a game over screen. Now, okay, so going back real quick, at some point you're going to have to make a decision if you're adding juice to your game, like what's in good taste and what's in bad taste and what's an appropriate fit for my game. Let's forget all that for now and go way beyond bad taste and just continue adding things, because why not? It's fun. It's a talk about juice. So in this, I've just done something ridiculous where I'm like pushing the walls away from the character, and I don't know why I'm doing that, but it's just fun. And whenever you see new tiles, they kind of fly in from off screen, and there's a little bit of animation there, and it just makes it really fun to just go around the level. And I'm pewing a little bit. So okay, my favorite part about this is when you walk through a hallway, it looks like you're like climbing through the intestines of a large beast, and it's just a little ridiculous. Okay, we'll add some music. Again, please tell me this is too loud. If you're doing a roguelike, you should probably have slow music so the player can really take their time and make decisions. But like, you don't have to go that way. You can have a fast-paced game. So let's have some juicy music. Now let's just get totally wild and just start bouncing everything for no reason. Even the corpses are going to bounce, right? This doesn't make sense, but like we're having fun. Even the trees are bouncing around. We're all having a good time. One more slide, and there's a warning that this has some flashing colors, but we just want to go as wild as possible. And it may make you nauseous if you get seasick easily or whatever. So just a warning. I'm going to change now. Yeah. So now I've got like the whole thing. It's like pulsating, and there's colors, and like, yeah, maybe this is too ridiculous for your game, but like I had fun making this. Okay, that's it. That's all I have. Just a couple more slides for references, but this is juice essentially. I hope you can either, if you're a developer, that you can use these techniques, or if you're a player, maybe you can recognize some of the techniques in the games that you play. And yeah, here's some references. The first 3 links are like kind of landmark talks on this topic. If you're going to do any of this, I really would recommend that you watch them. Art of the Screen Shake, really solid from Van Bleer. 4-Hour Game Design from Cactus. That's not actually 4 hours, like 30 minutes, and Juice It or Lose It. And the 4th link is like a paper on game fill and juice with over 200 sources. So it's pretty solid if you want to get a little academic. One of the authors of this I saw on Twitter this week, they along with, I believe, Mike Cook, made some prototype project which actually automatically adds juice to a game, and that kind of blew my mind. Yeah. So time for questions.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm so hyped. But I think that the drama ad was my personal favorite, and I hope that a lot of people are going to be taking that back to their own roguelikes. Cud, I know that you're in there, Brian and Jason. Add the drama. But yes, we have some questions along with a lot of yelling of pew pew and juice.
Awesome.
Have you ever seen a juicing technique used inappropriately or gone horribly wrong?
So I mean, the first, I would go back to the blocking animation, because people told me like, Dreadmore. So I've not actually played it, but that's one thing to avoid. I think I heard people say maybe like Teleglitch was a little bit too much for them, but like, again, if it fits your game, add it. If your game is cartoony, it can be a little bouncy. If you're making like Infra Arcana, maybe these are not necessarily good techniques to use.
Yeah, limit the juice a little bit. You don't want to be juice bloated and super slow. And that was a question from Travis from Hyper Gardens. What's the most challenging aspect of juice from a programming perspective? Does it ever come up that it interferes with the game logic or kind of makes things harder in that way?
So, okay, one thing I didn't add to this talk, this was all just prototype for this talk. One thing I didn't add because it was too difficult is having basically like a logical flow of the animations. I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain this well, but in a roguelike, you attack and the monsters attack you at the same time. But if you wanted to, you can show you attack and then the monsters attack you. Or like if I shoot my projectile, like I fire like an arrow, right, and it goes through the air and it lands on a monster. If you let the animations play out, but you don't synchronize as well, the monster can move away from the arrow before it's actually landed. That looks kind of weird. And I will tell you those things are present in Golden Krone Hotel because they're just really hard to work out because you have to kind of schedule things. And it's a lot of work and I just never tackled it.
Right. So that kind of syncing up of things independently doing stuff that would have to kind of animate together.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. Sapphic Linguini has the question: how do you feel about juice in more strategic resource managing games?
I think it would like even if like the things you've seen might not work for you, like the UI, add some feedback to the UI elements, buttons. If there's like if you unlock something, you know, it should flash, it should look good. It should basically this is about polish, and I don't think anyone can argue that their game has enough polish. So I don't know if I play a lot of those games, but I don't see a reason why it wouldn't fit.
Right. And I think that last question, also from Sapphic Linguini: what's your favorite fruit juice?
Oh, I guess
thought
I'll
that
go
was
with
an easy one.
I guess I'll go with pineapple. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Bold choice. I know you can get apple juice in the social space, so go find your juice.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremiah. You have been assigned the Rogue speaker breakout room, so I don't know if you'll be hanging out in there or not. But people who want to talk about juice can go yell a bit more in there.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Thank
You so much. All right. So, okay. Hi, everyone. It's me. I didn't think I introduced myself. My name's Alexi. I didn't say that. I'm very excited about Roguelike Celebration. And that was our first group of amazing talks. We've already learned too much, I think, to hold in our small brains for this early in the conference, but there is more. We're now going to be kicking off some social time and be back in half an hour for a bunch of lightning talks, which are extremely exciting. So use this chance to wander around a bit, get a glass of water. Some things to mention here is that I know some people have mentioned not being able to see messages in the social space. One thing to do is to check your ad block. It shouldn't matter, but you know, it's one of the things to check on. And as usual, refreshing the page can help out. So thank you for your patience in this special space we've built ourselves. And yeah, you know, keep an eye out if you're watching this on Twitch or YouTube or anywhere like that and you're wondering what we're talking about. It's not too late. Go and get a ticket, join our social space, hang out. And I know people were sharing lots of interesting links and game references and stuff in the chat. Go ahead and add those to the Space Hangar Lounge. And also, we are going to have a hot fix rolling out in just a minute because this is a live conference. And so you will see a pop-up on your screen telling you that your client's been updated. So just hit OK and you should end up in the same room. And it's the excitement of, you know, we're making it live. So I'm going to let everyone go and I'll be back here at the next turn of the hour to introduce Brenda Romero to start with. So it's going to be a day, folks. Have fun and I will see you in 28 minutes. Hello, here I am. All right, everyone. Yeah, I am here a couple minutes early. We're about to start our next block of talks. These are going to be lightning talks. If you haven't been to Roguelike Celebration before, these are kind of 15-minute, shorter, quick talks from a bunch of different exciting speakers. Chance to kind of show off a bunch of cool stuff. So we're going to get going with that soon. I've seen people exploring the space and having a good time, which is great. Thank you so much for engaging with it and the patience of we pushed out our live update. It seems like we've made it through, so thank you for that. And yeah, reminders that there is a note wall in the Space Hangar Lounge to share links. Keep an eye out for those note walls as you explore. And if you run into problems, try refreshing and let us know. There's also a note wall in the central hall where you can report kind of suggestions and issues with the month. And yeah, don't forget about the code of conduct. And if you ever have any kind of problems, you can type /mod to talk to us. But yeah, we're about to kick things off for another great chunk of questions. It looks like too the speaker breakouts worked really well. So thank you for that. For the lightning talks in particular, we often don't have a lot of time for Q&A since the slots are so short, but we have assigned all of our lightning talk speakers to a breakout room. So you can use those at the end of the chunk of talks to potentially ask some questions and things like that. It's our kind of balance of we don't want to make you choose between, do I want to ask more questions or do I want to actually attend the next talk? So we've set it up with the intention that once all of the kind of talks inside of a chunk are done and it's time for a break, then that's the time to go into that room. But of course, we're not the boss of you. You can always just go there early if you want. There just might not be the speaker or other people yet. But yeah, I think that, yeah, you're scared. I'm surprised you with an early appearance. Though part of my reason for starting early is that I wanted to have the proper time to introduce, in particular, our first lightning talk speaker, because I'm very excited that our first speaker is going to be Brenda Romero, who I would hope that a lot of people are familiar with, but she's a BAFTA award-winning game director, entrepreneur, artist, and Fulbright Award recipient. She's presently the game director and creator of the Empire of Sin franchise and working out of Ireland. She's worked on 50 games, contributed to many seminal titles like Wizardry, Jagged Alliance, titles in Ghost Recon, Dungeons & Dragons, and Def Jam franchises. And Away from Machines, her analog series of 6 games, The Mechanic is the Message, has drawn national and international acclaim, particularly Train and Sean Late, a game about her family's history, which was presented at the National Museum of Play. In addition to a BAFTA and a Fulbright, if that's not enough, she's gotten multiple Lifetime Achievement Awards, Grace Hopper Award, DDC Ambassador, basically just all around extremely inspiring person who I personally look up to and was very excited to have with us. So, and there we go. We're at top of the hour. So if you're ready, we'll bring you on, Brenda. There we go.
All right, hang on a sec.
Oh, we got some duplicated audio right now. Figuring it out here, folks.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, I had to, I put up 2 different, and I'm guessing you're looking at a slide right now, is that right?
Yes, we have the slide. It looks like your video right now is a black screen. I don't know if you want to try and fix that or if that's just technology being what technology is.
My video, meaning my camera?
Yeah, your camera.
Okay, well, let's just pretend I'm sitting in the dark because we've got this. Actually, let me see if I can fix that. Hold on 2 seconds. Stop. Start cam. Isn't that weird? Yeah, I don't know why. You know what? I suspect that I suspect it's doing that just because anyway, we've got the slides, and the slides are what matter.
As long as you won't be eaten by a grue, it's all right. You can.
Yeah, well, if you hear screams, that's what it is. So,
awesome.
Yeah, I changed over from Firefox to Chrome because Firefox wasn't working. Anyway, but that's not what we're here to hear. We all know about tech problems. So thank you for that great introduction. As you mentioned, I'm Brenda Romero, and I'm going to talk about dynamic relationships and traits in Empire of Sin. So I got interested in dynamic relationships and traits in games in 1981 with this specific game, which was called Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. It was the very first wizardry. And in this game, you could create a party of 6 characters. And truthfully, the characters actually did not develop dynamic relationships at all. However, in my head, they did. And I took these characters and their personalities and their interactions way further than the game ever intended them to go. And then this fascination might actually go back even further to my tabletop days. So I started playing D&D in 1978, and when I think about my original D&D group, it was interesting to watch how relationships formed dynamically amongst the characters, and then the players acting out those characters, and then the DM. And I was well aware. I mean, I was a kid. I was a pretty young kid at the time. I was 11, and I was really aware that there was relationships that were forming between the characters, and I watched characters fall in love and get married. And then, as I kept playing D&D throughout my life, I've seen people meet in the game and fall in love. And I knew that on the surface level that there was this thing about relationships and how relationships forming in the game affected the game itself. So things really take off for me when I worked on this game, Jagged Alliance, in 1995. So the game itself is designed by Ian Curry, Sean Ling, and Linda Curry. And in the game, you select a group of mercenaries to work with. So the mercenaries had relationships with one another, and it affected who would work with whom. The relationships also developed dynamically over the course of the game. And it was these relationships that really made Jagged Alliance stand out from all other tactical turn-based games at the time. So the mercenaries had basically a web of likes and dislikes and hatreds. Obviously, hatreds means there's no way they're going to work with them. And it really determined who would work with whom. But it wasn't just that simple. So some relationship types could override other relationship types. So, for instance, the death rate, meaning the amount of people you were killing, and the game tracked that, whether you had developed a bad reputation, if they had a buddy on the team, if a buddy got fired, if a buddy died due to your poor management, and a bunch of others. So it was a web that mostly excited and interested players, and it gave depth to the characters as they reacted dynamically to the things that you were doing in the game. So fast forward to Empire of Sin, and knowing that it would feature a diverse cast of characters, specifically in the game, we had 14 bosses and 60 different gangsters. I really wanted dynamic relationships to be a part of this. Also, it was a Paradox game. So if you've played Paradox games, specifically if you played the Crusader Kings series, you know that it goes way further than Jagged Alliance did. In fact, it even takes into account who your father was and who your mother was. And there's loads of traits that the characters develop throughout the course of play. So when it came to Empire of Sin, which is what you're looking at here, I wanted there to be something similar, and I wanted those traits to reflect the time period as well as the potential of gameplay. Here you can see a majority of the characters available and in the game, as well as a hint about the relationships with one another. So, you know, who hates who. Obviously, here some characters are dead or injured, some are out on mole missions, but you get a sense of how these characters feel about one another, and just hovering over one will show it to you. And in addition to their relationships with one another, I wanted to focus on your performance in the game, meaning your performance as the boss, and then the gangster traits. Specifically, for this, I'm going to focus on gangster traits. So gangster traits can affect many things in the game, but if individually they tend to affect or trigger just one or two things. Sometimes they might affect more, but if they ended up doing too many, it ended up just being way too complicated, and it was a spider web for players to get their head around. So we divided traits into several categories. The first of which was the historical traits. So these traits, gangsters come into the game with these, and they simply cannot be changed. They're examples, like some examples are a character is an immigrant, or the character fell on hard times. So whatever they are, this is how they arrive to you. So then we had a life lesson traits. Now, not all gangsters actually had a life lesson. The really young gangsters, or the gangsters who didn't have a lot going on upstairs. They haven't really been around enough to learn a life lesson, but a lot of the gangsters did, and this sort of filled out their personality for the players. They could get these as well during the course of the game if something very significant happened. There was also physical attribute traits. Likewise, these are only held by some gangsters, and physical attribute traits. Some people came into the game with like giant. Others people could get like hair trigger. They could get that during the course of the game, and it turns out hair trigger is one of the favorite traits in the game. Then last, there was personality traits. These were are the most malleable of the bunch. So gangsters earned these traits during gameplay, and I wanted them to interact with one another and affect the game in positive and negative ways. And I guess critically, I wanted to make sure that the player never felt stuck with a bad trait. There should always be a way around the situation. Otherwise, nobody would ever choose that character, or a combination of characters if they performed those actions together. So critically, for me, the characters needed to evolve with the gameplay and with the player, because if they didn't, then it was literally just the same play every time, and nobody wanted that. So some gangsters like Grover, so you can see, Grover's he's an older gangster, and he was pretty much near the end of his career. And so he was who he was, and he comes with like most of his traits pretty well set. The younger and the more malleable a gangster was, the more the player could affect their growth. So I've managed to effectively create this whole potential web for the player of traits and personality types and who likes whom. But that's not actually where I start. So when I'm actually starting a game, I am trying to think of what things would be suggested by this specific time period. And when I'm doing this, I actually start with the systems, because if I'm building traits and trying to create something dynamic, I need to make sure that it works dynamically in the time period and in the systems I have. So for this specific game, I just start listing out the systems, the obvious ones. There's alcohol, there's bosses, there's the crew that you're going to hire, the businesses that you run, the clients that you have, the citizens who are in the city and might be ticked off about everything that's going on. There's the police, there's the feds, and then there's all the other systems that are there. And so in doing this, I'm really thinking about the intersections of these things, all the items they have, how they move around, the collisions and the conflict. And with this, when I set the systems for the game, I really get a sense about how I can do certain things that will dynamically affect many systems. So, for instance, suppose you had a character who had the trait cheapskate, and that was like a boss trait that you had. So immediately, those interactions, you can see how that could dynamically affect many different things. And understanding the systems gives me an idea of how powerful or underpowered a specific trait might be in the world. So getting the system set also gives me a good idea of the world and the tension and the conflict. And it may show me things that I want to change dynamically. And instead of looking at a character or a wish that has a prescribed set of relationships already baked into them, I'm really trying to think about something brand new where lots of different dynamic interactions can occur. And I'm not so much cared at this point in time about the who, what, where, when, why, all of this stuff. I'm really just looking at the systems, the dynamic interactions, and how these things can change. If the player wanted to play as the feds, the untouchables, I can start thinking about what would be the things that would have the most likelihood to respond to dynamic trait change. Also, it allows me to emphasize one system over another and give it priority, thus changing the whole nature of the game and the balance of any dynamic elements. So, if combat is in the fore, obviously this is a very different game than if it's about purely building your empire. And through this process, I'm really able to see the possibility space afforded by the systems and new opportunities for dynamic play. And that's what I'm always looking for. So I'll leave you with a couple of my absolute favorite bugs that came out of this, because it's probably the best thing about having a dynamic system. So this is the cleaner. And the cleaner was a loner and a narcissist. It turns out he fell in love with himself. And so that when anybody else fell in love with him, he got jealous. And this actually went one step further. When he did fall in love with himself, because anybody else who fell in love with him was a threat to him loving himself, he would kill them. There was also Mama Dunbar, and this is the same exact bug. We had relationships in the game. She platonically loved all her children, and so when we switched it over, her children ended up getting jealous of one another and killing each other, and we call it the Great Dunbar Family Feud. So we obviously fixed those in launch. But that's a quick look at dynamic relationships and traits in Empire of Sin. And if you want to contact me, that's my contact info down there. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Love ending on the point of bugs. I know that, yeah, Jason Grimblatt has a talk later just about those kind of stories.
Yeah, they're so good.
Yeah, and it's amazing to get, a look at the process. I don't know if people have any questions in the note wall. We got just one. So huge fan of your work. Thanks for the really fruitful talk. This is from Catacalypto, or Cat Manning. I know who it is. Can you talk a bit more about what systems you find most fruitful to surface or transform the player's understanding via traits?
What systems? Like Empire of Sin is pretty combat heavy at the moment, right? So a lot of the traits surface as a result of combat. So that's in the outcomes of combat. Like if they end up getting sent to the hospital and something weird happens in the hospital, one of the great, I want to call it a cheat, but it's not really because you can't show everything. But one of the great things, if you take characters away, like out of the player's agency, they're injured, they're in the hospital, they're away, they're a mole. If once or they were employed by somebody else, when the characters go away from player control, you can do so much cool stuff. They can come back with, like, I don't know, a fear of plants. Now, we don't have that, and I don't know why you'd ever have a fear of plants, but it's a wonderful opportunity as a game designer to do anything you want to do.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah, taking advantage of the being off the main screen.
Yeah, like you don't even know without a screen here what traits I will have after this.
Right.
Like
Who knows?
I could be going through all kinds of terrible things. I might be calling you from the Middle Ages. You have no idea.
Who knows? Yeah. Or we might all leave this with a fear of plants. I think that we're going to have feelings about juice after earlier discussions.
Why? You know what? I'll be sitting here all night thinking, could I have not come up with a better example on the fly? But nope. Fear of plants is what it was, and I'm sticking by it.
I mean, there are some scary plants out there. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, we've assigned the mage room, I believe. So I'm not sure if you have time to hang around, Brenda, but other people who want to talk about character traits and Empire of Sin can go ahead and head there after the end of the lightning talk round. So yeah, thank you so much for attending. It's been an honor to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. All right. And so moving along a little bit early, but nothing wrong with that. Next up, we are going to have Jasmine Otto, who is talking about cyclic plot generation in a mixed initiative narrative instrument. Very exciting. Jasmine creates and studies software instruments, which I find a really just evocative phrase. So without getting too into it, I think I'll just let you take the floor. Uh-oh, we got some issues with your mic quality there. I don't know if there's like jiggle the connectors. One moment. You sound really cool. You sound like a really cool robot, but it's not an understandable robot, unfortunately.
I have switched to my default mic.
There you go. You sound great. All right.
All right. Hello, and I'm really excited to be going on after Brenda's amazing talk because I'm really interested in sort of exposing these social worlds and taking the interface, what I'm calling the narrative instrument, as your point of contact with the player, as a way to sort of suggest as much as you can without having to do all the heavy lifting back in this behind the scenes. I'll get into what that means. I'm Jasmine. I'm Jadzak on Twitter. And the game I've been making, it's actually a series of prototypes. It's called Druid Game. This is a social simulation that I've been trying several different backends for to make these faction games happen without necessarily using a trait system. We'll talk about how I'm mounting the storylets. I'm going to go through the background a little fast here. So the social world, most of it, there's always the danger that all the things your characters are doing to each other, and maybe there's hundreds of characters, you can't put that all on the screen at once and have the player be expected to follow it. You really have to carefully pick where their attention is. You're going to give them an interface that allows them to very cleverly point their attention at different parts of the simulation that are relevant to them, because say they're playing a specific sim, and that sim has a particular rival, and now they're going to go over and check out what the rival is doing, and 80 other sims are just going about their day. So I do not have the resources of Maxis of a game studio. It's just me. So I'm building for these prose games. I started thinking this would be a parser game. Then I was thinking, oh, it's in the browser. It's an idle game. And now I'm all the way around to thinking, this is really a bunch of decks of cards that have some narrative instrument that I'm still trying to figure out what kind of genre it is. I'm presenting this using a lot of inspiration from tarot. So that's a way to experience the story of the world from more than one perspective, specifically that of the querent and the reader. As the querent, I'm playing the game in sort of the traditional way, but as the reader, I am taking the deck that's all the storylets that exist in the game and manipulating those and sort of stacking the deck in certain ways to lead myself as the querent through the narrativization of these cards, which don't have any artificial intelligence. There's no way there can be bugs in there, but funny surprises happen anyway, and that's great. Most of those surprises come from the card having many features I could latch onto, and only a few that I'm actually going to latch onto in the moment. And I really want to, I've done this with illustration, but now I really want to try and see if prose has the same polysemous quality. So this works less well in generic story worlds. This is sort of an early attempt where I'm really focused on getting the plot out, getting the beats out of the source of randomness activity and dropping it into a context that is going to show exactly what happened in this world of three characters. It just prints it out to the screen. Your interaction with it is, I don't like that. Give me another telling of this story, or make a new story and tell me that one. And that lets me have the conversation with the deck that gives me the sense of whether it's making principled decisions or it's starting to contradict itself. So I want to get into some of the other prototypes before I get into the juice. And the main decision here is that all of these are connected by the idea that all your agents in these are druids. They're magic. They're really mean to each other. There's lots of drama. So I one of my early prototypes was this idea that people will play Sims 3 in a wolf run. They'll let the Sims do their thing for tens of generations without laying a hand on the simulation. And that's going to ideally produce these interesting family trees that you can then go into your Sims panel and look at that. So I put together just that module, and I decided to make it a little more interesting, that you have long-lived vampires in town who can cause other characters in town to become long-lived vampires. And it makes these really fun trees that you can tab around using the panel of all the characters here, but it's not that fun to just sit down with it and watch it go for a little bit. This is really something I would be coming into the artifact at the end and trying to piece it together. This wasn't a prose game. So I took another shot at characters learning from other characters. Now they've got these text descriptions, and the text descriptions keep getting longer because they go to other characters and gain aspects from them. And a few of these are special characters who can invent new aspects. And I have another file here that just contains the tech tree of all the aspects that each of these characters can have. And then I let them bounce off of each other and figure out what descriptions they end up having with this really storyful history. This was fun. I'm rolling this back into the game, but since it's forward simulation, they have no idea how to stop. They just accumulate more description text forever. So I decided to allow murders to happen, because eventually most of the characters will be murdered, and I can say, okay, this is a new start condition, reset. I wanted them to be able to reason about who had murdered each other in kind of a clumsy way. So now there's a system where all of them belong to this faction, and the faction is allowed to attack the other faction, and they're allowed to accuse each other. But I was having a really bad time debugging it to figure out, okay, I want this event ultimately to fire where somebody is dramatically accused of doing a murder. And there's just so many people going tit for tat, or tat, tat, tat in this case, that it's really interesting, but the game isn't giving me the leverage I need here. So this is how I came to this idea of cyclic stories generation. And that's very much the idea of cyclic dungeon generation that we know from level design, from games like Unexplored. But now, instead of trying to guarantee there's a key and a door, we're guaranteeing when I set up a plot element, it will pay off. So I'm going to stick with the social graph abstraction, but I'm going to make this coloring on it, and I'm going to read off the colorings in a certain way. So in this case, that red character is that betrayer, who has generated this verb, and with respect to that target, who's the yellow character. We also have a helper in this one, who can also fire a verb, and that has a certain storylet, which is the prose gloss. And I'm trying to find the boundary between the verb, which might have this stateful consequence in the world, and the storylet, which doesn't have any consequences in the world of the game, but only in the mind of the reader, which is where we want to create the sense of interaction in the end anyway. So some of the tricks, one more trick here, to do the pacing so that characters aren't pinging off each other in random order, we're actually going to we're not going to select edges at random. We're going to walk this edge. Now both of those characters are in the scene. We're going to walk the next edge. Now maybe a third character entered the scene, or maybe we started a new scene with 2 characters. And that's a cut. And the cuts start to create the feeling that maybe this is a chapter of prose rather than a raw event trace. They're acting like they're separating out the floors of this game. And that kind of chunking is going to support a lot more complexity in the prose, hopefully. We're not allowed to remove characters completely because it's cyclic generation. They might have actions they still have to do, but we can stack their deck and change it so that if they got killed, now they're a ghost, and people are appropriately distressed when they are interacting with this ghost. That's a fun thing to be able to author for. And this has extensions to more faction-based games. There's a lot of potential if you multi-scale it, if I can get this cyclic library to be nice and modular, so that you can have the faction game that's triggering these peer-to-peer interactions and then zooms back out to the larger picture. So that's my goal. These are my tricks. And yeah, I'm really excited to just talk about things we want to make with these kinds of affordances. Ask me anything about the tech stack or libraries or other work in like story sifting. That's was out of the scope of this talk, but it's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lot to fit into 15 minutes, so thank you for cramming so much knowledge in. Everyone, I think, yeah, really enjoyed it. It looks like people got some cool ideas for some work themselves. So, yeah, we've assigned the Rogue breakout room to if anyone wants to talk cyclic plot generation. So, and again, if people go there early, we won't stop you. But the plan is that like we have 2 more lightning talks at the end of those 30 minutes. Then everyone's free to go chat in those rooms. But yeah, have fun. Go into the Rogue room if you want to talk cyclic plot generation or about how much you love Node B. So thank you, Jasmine. All right. And moving right along, we're going to have our next speaker coming up now. And our next speaker will be Francesco Catone, who is talking Chronicles of Stampedia and other postcards from an alternate world. I hear you bring a souvenir from a magical sounding world where there's no boundary between games and toys. So please take it away. I'm excited to know more.
Okay, well, hi, I'm Francesco, and the last few months I worked on a third-based roguelike called Chronicles of Stampedia. It works this way. On the project website, every day there is a new one-page adventure to print and play with 2 dice, an eraser, a pencil, and a small token, like a small button. Well, Chronicles of Stampedia generates roguelike adventures to play with no computer. And even if it may look like a weird way to play a roguelike adventure, there is a whole gaming world that plays games and even video games this way. But first, I'd like to tell you the story of Chronicles of Stampedia. Chronicles of Stampedia is my personal answer to one of the most crucial questions in roguelike gaming, and that's, is there a gaming system that's still missing his mandatory, minimal-looking, turn-based roguelike? And my answer was yes, but to get the answer, you need to switch your perspective a little on what a gaming system is. I'd like to introduce you a gaming system that probably you already know, but you don't know it with this name. And that's the Beach Umbrella gaming system. The Beach Umbrella gaming system is a gaming system you often play in summer under the beach umbrella. It works this way. Game schemes are often pre-generated and printed on one side of a sheet of paper, and pencil and eraser are two common input devices. Numbers, grids, lookup tables, and basic math are interface elements, and deluxe editions of the system may include playing cards or dice, mostly to play social games. Well, the Beach Umbrella gaming system games are often single-player puzzle games, and that's why I started working on Chronicles of Stampedia, because this system is missing his roguelike with minimal graphics. Another question I had to answer was, is it possible to feel like playing a computer roguelike using just paper? And the answer is yes, and I'd like to talk to you about 4 Against Darkness. 4 Against Darkness is a 2016 dungeon crawler by Andreas Filigoi. It's a 100 pages book explaining the rules, and it's a game inspired by pen and paper RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, adapted to be played by a single player. To play the game, you need the manual, a sheet of squared paper, 2 dice, an eraser, and a pencil. A cool thing about 4 Against Darkness is that dungeons are also randomly generated. It uses dice rolls and lookup tables in a manual to generate treasures and monsters, but it also generates the dungeon layout using a specific lookup table, so the player will draw the map as he explores it. There are a lot of good ideas in 4 Against Darkness to steal, to get inspiration from, but we have to adapt these cool ideas to the system limitations. The Beach Umbrella game schemes are often pre-generated and then partially printed. Think about crosswords. So Chronicles of Stampedia must do the same. The game code generates a consistent dungeon in memory using classic dungeon generation algorithms, but only prints a grid with the starting room and numbers around all the room doors. When the player enters a new room with a token, the player will sum the exit number with the coordinates of the cell to get an ID to look for in a lookup table, and the matching row will explain where the room is, the room size, and the room description. Unlike 4 Against Darkness that uses dice rolls, Chronicles of Stampedia knows the whole dungeon from the very beginning, like classic dungeon crawlers. So why not try adding some kind of modern storytelling to the game? But is it possible to create an interactive, non-linear storytelling using just paper? And the answer is still yes, and I'd like to talk to you about Fallout, the board game. Fallout, the board game, is a 2017 adventure and exploration board game from Fantasy Flight Games. It's a game inspired by the Fallout series. For example, the first mission tells key events of Fallout 4. Maps are randomly generated, by the way. Mission maps and events are partially randomized, and a lot of the original game mechanics has been adapted. For example, the fighting system, the character customization, the radiations effects, and so on. But the cool thing about this game is that the narrative system has been adapted to the board game too. When the player visits a place on the game board, he may decide to perform an encounter action. When the player performs an encounter action, he draws an encounter card from that place type deck of cards. On the cards, there is a short story, and the player may take a decision. Consequences of that decisions may ask the player to pick a numbered card from the game box, and shuffle it into one of the decks of cards. This way, the player will face the consequences of his own decision elsewhere, and well as expected. But another cool thing about Fallout the board game is that the game is able to mix multiple interactive storylines in the same adventure. There are a lot of cool ideas also in Fallout the board game. For example, short sentences are good to tell a story, even if the story is as complex as the Fallout one. And short sentences both fits the small amount of space in the lookup table on a sheet of paper and the game genre. For example, the classic rogue, uses short sentences to tell the player what happened. Chronicles of Stampedia also needs a database of quests split in sub-events as Fallout. These sub-events will be eventually scattered around the dungeons from the starting room to the farthest room of the dungeon. But even using this technique, the player may roam around the dungeon, breaking the sequence. So some kind of memory system, even if this game is on paper, is needed. But is it possible to let the player store the secret data behind his own back? And the answer is still yeah. I'd like to talk to you about Fable Lands, The War-Torn Kingdom. Fable Lands, The War-Torn Kingdom is a 1995 gamebook by David Morris and Jamie Thompson. And it's a gamebook that instead of telling a branching path story as many classic gamebooks, it offers interconnected areas that the player may freely explore, like in open world video games like Skyrim. The player will meet strange characters, will accept and fulfill quests, will fight monsters, and as in sandbox gaming, he will look for creative ways to get killed. You can even move from one book of the series to another book, sailing on in-game ships. It's a very cool and modern game book. But the cool thing about this book is it managed to let the player store secret data on paper. The book may ask the player to tick a checkbox printed on the page without explaining the reason. When a certain condition is verified, the game may ask the player to jump to another paragraph instead of keep reading. This way, the game may keep track of the time passing, the gold the player spent, player past decisions, clear quests, and so on. Starting from this idea, I've added to the game a system of checkboxes, shuffled checkboxes, one for every room, to track the player decisions and obfuscate in some way the consequences. Moreover, the game code, the room descriptions are using a set of placeholders that are solved and translated to English when printed on paper. This way, I could find shorter and more readable sentences during development without changing all the code. And this is the way the game targets table and map elements. Well, long story short, Chronicles of Stampedia has been inspired by a lot of gaming worlds. And I hope you will explore one of these worlds, at least one of these worlds. If you're a roguelike gamer or a roguelike game designer, I suggest you to start from exploration board games. There is a lot of stuff in common with classic roguelike video games, but I don't want to spoil you the fun here. But I brought some proofs coming from my board game collection. First, Bloodborne is a game with randomly generated dungeons and is a funny party game. Superhot Mind Control Delete first featured randomly generated levels in 2020, but there is a prequel that did the same in the 2017. Or City of Kings, a cooperative RPG that literally uses a bag system, so a system of real-life bags to generate random enemies. In Magic Maze, players are exploring randomly generated dungeons together, but in real time. So it makes it a roguelite board game, I don't know. And there is a free mini rogue game that you can play with just 9 cards, using just 9 cards, but don't worry, 2 of them are used for the user interface. Well, I hope you enjoyed our short trip in Chronicles of Stampedia design and I hope to see you roaming around randomly generated dungeons, but in other gaming worlds.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. I'm still caught up on that, having hidden data in something that the player's out filling out themselves over paper. That I didn't know you could do that. So that's amazing. We actually have 4 minutes. Does anyone have some questions for Francesco? You could put them in the note board, or you could probably do it right in chat because I'm watching. But yeah, we actually have a few minutes because that was a nice tight talk. Very good lightning talk timing.
I didn't want to spoil you the fun to discover why roguelike video games and board games have a lot in common, but one suggestion I can give you is that roguelike games usually use randomly generated content to give longevity to a game. In board games is a way to stay alive, to make the game, because story-based board games are shorter. We can't make long stories in board games, so random generation is a way to create longer game experience. So it's quite mandatory to make a roguelike game when you are making an adventure game in board game. It's quite an often practice.
Yeah, an overlap of the way the development works. That's really interesting. Okay, I've got one question here from Mr. Foldy. Does it take a lot of designer time to make each daily Stampedia puzzle?
Chronicles of Stampedia works with a database of quests and subquests that are randomly selected, and each quest have some random elements on it. So it's all made by the algorithm. So I fill the database, then the rooms are randomly scattered around the dungeon, are making the dungeon, and then the quests are quest hotspots are scattered around. So there is no work for the designer to make the quests. Moreover, is often text only, so you can tell the story without making graphics and so on. More of the stuff. A lot of stuff of Chronicles of Stampedia happens in the player's mind because it's just symbols and numbers and dice rolls, as in many board games, and sometimes it works. If you play with the rules of Chronicles of Stampedia, you can make moral decisions. So Chronicles of Stampedia features multiple endings. Some quests has multiple endings. There is a card game you can play in Chronicles of Stampedia. Is a very simple card game called the Beast Crafters. But there are also other little features like shape puzzles that are common in action adventures, but you can find shape puzzles in Chronicles of Stampedia too, and so on. But making a quest needs just a few minutes.
Right. It's mostly that setup in the beginning.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. And if people have more questions or want to talk about it, your room is the tourist.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that'll be in 15 minutes after our next talk. So thank you so much, Francesco, and I'll see you around.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. Next up, it is Addie Bora, a coworker of mine. We know each other.
From work.
From work. Yeah, friend from work. But also a talented game designer, works in systems-driven kind of development, and addicted to D&D and a self-described forever DM. So I'll let you get on with teaching us how to apply systems to reduce your Dungeon Master prep.
Thanks. Preface: I'm going to be nerding out about Dungeons and Dragons and say a lot of lingo. So if you haven't played much Dungeons and Dragons, I'm going to link just a link in the chat. Oh wait, Alexa, could we link that in the chat actually?
Yes, I'll do that for you.
Yeah, just in case you don't know any lingo, you can Control F on the website and find any terminology. Okay, so story time. A 2-year-long campaign I was DMing for friends was coming to an end. I had a terribly tough week at work, and I had totally forgotten about an upcoming session for that campaign. I had 30 minutes of prep time before it was go time, and I was super stressed. I didn't want my players to have a bad session. I didn't want to cancel last minute. Coincidentally, I had this half-baked, untested combat generator that hadn't seen the light of day in a while. I took the gamble, generated the combat for that session in an instant, polished it for about 5-10 minutes, and now here I am to share with you how that generator changed the way I DM'd. So, hi, I'm Addy, he, him, associate game designer at Improbable. I'm still figuring out my ProcGen class, but let's go with Bart Druid for now. And I've been jamming for 3 years. And this is a talk about what it looks like when my ProcGen obsession starts leaking into my TTRPG life. So real quick, let's just generate. I'll show you how the generator works. So here we got a command prompt. I have a Python script over here. I'm going to choose a difficulty. Let's say it's going to be a hard encounter for a level 7 party. And boom, we got a wall of text. It has like hit points, armor class, DCs, stats, actions, special actions, desperation actions. What are those? I'll explain it in a little bit. For now, this is just the simplicity of how this generator works. But we'll be using a different stat block for this talk. It's a difficult encounter for a level 6 party. I generated this 30 minutes ago just to prove my point. And yeah, it's very similar, has stats and stuff like that. And it's pretty decent. So at first look, the stat block, just the wall of text, might look really weird. A lot of it doesn't look like a proper, fully fledged stat block from the monster manual. So here's a monster manual stat block for reference. This is an adult blue dragon. As you can see, the game designers have put a lot of thought into what it does. The lightning breath has like a whole spiel about it and how it's described and what players have to do in response to it. It's very detailed. On the other hand, here's my generated wall of text, which is quite abstract. There's like a layer of abstractness in the way the monster's various actions are described if you look into the list of creatures' actions. But that abstract wall of text was what I was going for because I wanted to make a lightweight, flexible, custom tool to complement my own improv-heavy DM style. So let's talk about the design of the generator a little bit because that might offer insight as to why I made it the way I made it. So 5e, 5th edition D&D, already gives me a set of rules for what a player can do, a monster can do on their turns in combat. So it was easy for me to model the output of the generator based on the stat blocks and the monster manual and actions in the books. However, I realized that what I really needed to define was the kind of output that I wanted to see at the end. What kinds of output lead to interesting combat encounters for my players? And that was an interesting design question for me to solve. So Matt Colville made a video about action-oriented combat. It highlights a design philosophy about how we can make combat in 5e engaging by telling an evolving story throughout the combat. He says, to pick a monster, think about the themes of that monster, what it would do under certain conditions, and then design the mechanics around the situations. Like, what does a goblin boss do when it's cornered? Yell at his subordinates to attack all at once, throw themselves at the problem. The monster should feel like it's reacting and has tactics to the party for the party to experience. I ended up borrowing from Colville's design philosophy because I've been using it for years and it works great for me. But for this generator, I decided to invert it. I would generate the numbers and mechanics first, and then I would use those as constraints to create a monster instead. That way, I don't have to think about the numbers at all. I just got to justify why things are the way they are, which to me is a lot easier and faster. So the generator deals with the numbers, the stuff that I find tedious to work with and doing preparation, and it lets me focus on storytelling by offering a level of abstraction in the descriptions of the monster's mechanics. So like, for example, in the special action number 1, the creature may drain resource or an ability cooldown of 3 rounds. It's an adjective verb pair. Special action, what is that? Drain could mean anything. Resources like hit points, spell slots. It could mean anything in a limited mechanical subspace. But the purpose is to inspire my creativity by offering constraints for me to work within. For example, when I see the stats on this thing, I notice the whole like drain gain pattern in the special actions, and accompanied with the ability to cast necromancy spells, it kind of exudes like an undead creature vibe to me, or some kind of necromancer. It has a move speed of 45, so maybe it can fly around like a ghost. I see the charisma is the highest stat. Maybe it's a leader, maybe it's a warlock. It has resistance and vulnerability to piercing damage. How does that even work? So for this stat block, for example, this is what it looked like after a few minutes of polish and throwing it into a stat block creator right before this talk. This is the hallowed soul of Princess Unjani. She was subjected to terrible torment in the castle of the city above, by the hands of the patriarchal sultanate. It's said that her restlessness and vengeful spirit haunts the sewers to this day, and that her ghoulish visage is flushed with wounds of the past as she teeters on the verge of undeath. That drain ability from earlier, it became a legendary action. If you look at special action Dreams of Torment, that's the evolution of that constraint. It basically makes the player characters roll a d20 for a save, and it has possibility to drain the spell slots, which in turn fuels her own kind of flickering between the ethereal and the prime material plane, and justifies the vulnerability and resistance to piercing damage. So when she's ethereal, she's resistant. If players stumble across her, on the way, if they're questing around, then there's a good chance they might get a bit curious about this sultanate and the sketchiness behind it, and end up taking up the quest to avenge Unjani and tear down the sultanate's patriarchy. As a DM, I can pepper in these generated combats and weave the outcome of the story of the combat into the overarching narrative later. And this has led to more dynamic arcs in narrative for my table stories. So, with that, I want to share some thoughts and questions that I've reflected on as I started making more generators to help me save prep time for my sessions. Number one, what parts of GMing do you want to put more focus on than others? This may reveal what parts of DMing feel tedious to you and what things you might want to automate, so that you can spend more time on different facets of DMing that you want to work on. You might not want to have the best kind of combat in the world, but you want to really make roleplay experience for your table feel really good. So automate the combat, focus on roleplaying. Session prep can get lonely. At the table, we're improving with our friends as NPCs, but while we're prepping behind the DM screen, there's often no one there to yes and with you. A generator could be that improv partner to help make session prep more creative and fun. So example, generator could tell me that this giant monster at 40% health, its desperation mechanic, will spawn tons of minions around the field. Yes, and the minions are specters of all the loved ones of the player characters. Now this is getting serious. And now there's a story. So I used to be the sort of DM who needed to know things before a session. At least I would spend like an hour to prepare before a session. I know a lot of DMs who have a lot of fun spending many hours in prep too. I do too. But for me, time after work is like my most precious resource. So instead of preparing for an hour right after work for a session, I can have tea time with my cat. I've learned to embrace the dark side of random generation and lean into it. It's made my TTRPG sessions more spontaneous and fun for me. And nothing feels better than rolling up at the table and telling your players that even you don't know what a combat would look like until you press the button on the computer and watch the fear in their eyes and revel in it. This is kind of what it looks like when I walk in with a weird creature for a session, and it's really fun. It's always very fun. It's a party of kobolds, each a different color, resembling a Power Ranger. So what else can we automate in our TTRPGs? All of this to ask, can we automate NPC dialogue, faction wars, the big bad evil guy's plot to victory, the entire complex thematic dungeon that you've been kind of developing for your players for months, skill challenges? Can we simulate the entire world of your D&D campaign between sessions so that it feels like it's being lived in and stuff is evolving around the players? This can go anywhere, and the constraints are possibly endless. I wouldn't recommend simulating your entire world, but if that's a challenge you want to take on, then go for it. But yeah, basically, I encourage you all to try and making a generator for your TTRPG games if you haven't already, whatever that might look like. It's quite fun in my experience, and I'm looking forward to iterating more on this generator of mine, this combat generator. Maybe I can make it have varying levels of detail depending on my mood. Anyway, if you ever make a generator for your TTRPG experience, then share with me what it looks like. I'm excited to take a look at it. I'm running an hour-long combat one-shot using this generator in the following social hour. So come hang out and play for like 45 minutes of lighthearted D&D with generated characters. And yeah, thank you for your time. I'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Addy. And yeah, like you just mentioned, people can look forward to you're going to be bold enough to do a live play demo. So very exciting. That was great. I think that we have one question in the note wall already from Alexa, which is, do you ever get outputs which you can't come up with anything for?
Personally, like my style is oriented towards like having the constraints allows me to just like pick things that I think will work well from it. So for example, if we go back all the way to the stat block earlier, sometimes I can't think about a good way to make this piercing and vulnerability to piercing work out. Sometimes it's just like a stump in a wall. So I'll just get rid of it, ignore it, and focus on other parts of the generation instead. And maybe use those as inspiration to develop a cool mechanic.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a team member. You can yes and you can also say no.
Exactly.
That's great. Are there any other questions for people? Use the note walls. People definitely were talking about other things they'd like to generate. I think it was Brian Buckley was wanting like a kingdom generator with kind of relationships and stuff like that you could improv off of.
Yeah, you could totally maybe make use of Matt Koval's Kingdoms and Warfare PDF and just like use those as the rules to generate entire kingdoms that players can mess around with and use as a stronghold. Be pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think maybe barring more questions from the chat, since I know that you're planning to run this D&D Spectacular, and goodness knows D&D Combat's not famous for being short, we'll maybe give you this extra 3 minutes. So Addie is appropriately for the combat going to be in the Warrior breakout room. And you can either try and use the video chat if it works well enough, cool. Otherwise, you can try and do something like share a Zoom link. I'm sure you'll, figure out what works best for you. So yeah, thank you so much. And people interested in watching this all play out live can go to Warrior. So we'll see you there, Addie.
Thank you. See you.
Cool. All right. And so that is the end of our lightning talk round, which I know is always just hot takes coming at you nonstop. To recap the room assignments, it is Mage is the room for Brenda Romero's talk on dynamic character traits and Empires of Sin. Rogue is for Jasmine Otto and talking cyclic plot generation. Tourist is Francesco Cotone talking about the postcards from another world. And Warrior is Addie talking about the, the stuff we just looked at, that I'm forgetting the name of. Tabletop, making your tabletop work better with systems. So you can go check all that out. We are now going to have an hour-long break. It's kind of the lunch break, though with time zones, who knows? I think for some people it's like 3 a.m. Thank you for being here. But get a snack, get some water, and we will be back in an hour with more talks. And yeah, you can feel free to use that time to hang out with speakers in the speaker breakouts. And the unconference rooms, we do some special stuff for when it's an unconference block, but they're open if you want to go check them out and explore the space. Someone's going to make nachos. I want nachos. There's nachos and fries. The vending machine food, unfortunately, is not as edible as I would hope, but I will try and find a slime mold. So thanks, everyone. And reminders if the space is doing anything weird, let us know. Note wall in the central hall or give it a refresh. And please feel free to explore, and we will see you in an hour. Thanks, everyone.